Hello and welcome to A Gypsy's Kiss. Today's topic in Important Words with Shelley Carney, the Magical Treasure Princess, will be about the words put in below from Forrest Fenn's treasure poem. So we'll get into that in just a moment. And we're recording out of my house today, so hopefully this will go well. Toby wasn't feeling well this week, so I stayed home and he stayed home. And we'll just move forward with what we have. All right. Today we're talking about put in below, as in put in below the home of Brown. What does it mean to put in below the home of Brown? We're thinking that the home of Brown is a geographical location you can find on a map because Forrest Fenn told us the poem is a map many times, but the direction is to put in below. So let's get into what that might mean. So we looked up the definition of put in, and it is to launch a small boat. Here's a sample sentence. The kayakers put in below the dam. And that's a nautical term, put in like that, in that way. And that's the definition that I found, and I think that's why everybody believes it is somewhat nautical. But let's remember it's not just put in, it's put in below. So what's the definition of below? In or to a lower place, such as gazed at the water below, under the surface of the water, 30 fathoms below, or down river from, moored a mile below town. So these all involve water as well. Interesting that the dictionary defined it that way. I'm going to also offer you the definition of bury. To put in the ground and cover with earth, as the pirates buried the chest on the island. Let's look at English to Spanish for put in. Meter en, or put in below. Poner abajo. And from Spanish to English, if we look at the word abajo, it means below, down, downstairs, under, beneath, or inside. And again, we see that the poem tells us put in below the home of Brown. And you're probably wondering why I'm offering you the word bury and the Spanish words, but we'll get into that shortly. All right, let's look at the thrill of the chase, page 33. If I could find where she's buried, I'd slip out there some dark night and push a nickel under her grave marker and just leave it there. So he doesn't know where the old woman is buried, but if he did, he'd go give her a nickel. He'd push it under her grave marker. Forrest Fenn seems to have an affinity for graveyards, grave markers, and important people and where they're buried. You just want to keep that in mind. Page 57. We should have buried him standing up. In that case, he's talking about his brother Skippy. And there's many suppositions about why Forrest Fenn might have said we should have buried him standing up. Because he was a brave adventurer. Not really sure because apparently Skippy was cremated, so can't really bury somebody standing up if they're cremated. Anyway, page 80. It was magical because a small waterfall in the center of the clearing dropped water so far that it turned to mist before it could spread on the rocks below. So the water is falling onto the rocks below, again involving water and water falling below. Put in below the home of Brown. Okay, page 87. As pre-planned, I took pictures of the blossomed parachute above me, the jungle threw my boots below me, and the plane before it crashed. I like this juxtaposition of what was above him and what was below him. And what he was doing was taking pictures of both as he was parachuting down to the jungle floor. below. Page 91. It was about an hour's flight to where the little stream dropped so mistfully onto the rocks below. Here he doesn't call it a waterfall. He says the stream dropped. A stream drop rather than a waterfall. Interesting. So mistfully onto the rocks below. Again, it's that same waterfall, and the water is falling to below. So let's keep in mind that twice now he's told us below, using that word in the context of that waterfall. Moving on to page 100. It is more than sad to me, not just that the French soldiers are dead and buried, but that no one knows where they are or even who they were. So when you bury something, it is likely to be forgotten about. Page 138. I buried those bells about 3 feet deep so a metal detector can't find them. Some may be on land owned by the American people, but tended by the Bureau of Land Management. So he specifically tells us that the bells are buried 3 feet deep so that a metal detector can't find them. And yet when he was asked, would a metal detector come in handy when finding the treasure, he said, if you're standing that close to the treasure, yes, but you would be able to see it at that point. So we have to kind of imagine from that series of comments that the treasure chest is not buried, but it may be well hidden so that you could be using a metal detector and come to the place where it was and then find it with the metal detector. But you would be standing pretty much right at it and should at that point be able to see it. So, but with the case of the bells, which are buried 3 feet deep, metal detector can't find them. So it sounds like he didn't bury the treasure chest. Otherwise, we couldn't find it with a metal detector if it was down too deeply. Either that or it's only just under the surface of the earth, maybe flat with the earth. Page 146. Yet, when I looked him up on Google, I discovered that he's buried alongside my mother in row 4 of Block 23 at the Hillcrest Cemetery. And that's about it. Maybe history doesn't want us to remember everything we've learned. And that's why the grass grows so tall over a French soldier's headstone in Vietnam. So here he's equating his father's grave right next to his mother's. He's equating the history of his father when he Googled him with the forgotten French soldier in the forgotten graveyard that he found in Vietnam. Things that are buried become forgotten. Too Far to Walk, page 22. There is something about nude dipping in a mountain stream that awakens the fantasy of unfettered freedom lying restless just below the skin of all dreamers with romantic notions of the past when life was roomier and less encumbered by the rules of social custom. This is a very poetic phrase, and we include the word below, just below the skin, under the skin, beneath the surface of the skin, so just below. So we might think that that treasure is just below the surface of something, the skin of something. Page 214. I carefully removed the flagstone lid. To our astonishment, we discovered a black smoke-smudged pottery jar that had been buried up to its rim under the floor. Inside the jar rested a rectangular painted bowl. Both contained corn kernels and roly-poly bugs. Evidently, the stone lid had been placed to cover the jar and keep mice and other critters away from the food. One may wonder, did this particular event inform Forrest as to how he wanted to hide his treasure, so that you would have to remove a flagstone piece in order to see the treasure? Perhaps. Page 223. Rusty became an important part of our family. When he died, I wrapped him in his bedding and buried him at San Lazaro Pueblo beside Del Chorro Creek. Buried him. He buried the dog in his bedding and put him under the ground, in the ground, buried him, and at San Lazaro Pueblo, which is another place that was forgotten by time. Page 243, there was nothing but raw nature for miles in every direction. We thought it was a special place to be buried. Nothing but raw nature for miles in every direction. We thought it was a special place to be buried. So if there's nothing but raw nature for miles in every direction, that could be a special place to be buried or hidden. Once upon a while, page 85, visiting Quanah's gravesite at the Fort Sill Indian Cemetery where he's buried beside his mother and daughter, Prairie Flower, was a spiritual experience for me. Again, it seems like Forrest Fenn has spiritual experiences every time he visits the gravesite of somebody important to him or important in history. Buried and not quite forgotten. Not forgotten by Forrest Fenn. Page 125. Once, when George and I were having dinner at the Irma Cafe in Cody, he spoke of watching an archaeologist uncover an Angostura point that was 28 feet below the cave's surface. The weapon had been flaked to kill an ancient species of bison that had not seen daylight for almost 9,000 years. Another forgotten place and another forgotten artifact below the cave's surface. So inside of a cave, this floor, the surface of the cave, digging down 28 feet. Wow, that's a really deep hole to have to dig to find something like that. But it goes back 9,000 years. I don't think we'll have to dig down that far because it's only been about 10 years for this treasure. Page 127. Today my thoughts sometimes hearken back to Mummy Joe, who was wrapped in sheepskins so long ago and buried deep in the dirt. What would I have thought when I was a kid, sitting on my rock, knowing that Joe was just a few feet away? So again, something that was buried and forgotten so long ago, much like Rusty, who was wrapped in his bedding and buried in the dirt at the Pueblo. Page 155. This is a poem that Forrest Fenn wrote. It's titled, Is It My Candy Ann? This is one piece of it. And he's talking about helicopters, different helicopters. The names of these female names are helicopters that were lost during the war. Maybe it's the spirit of Amelia, wrapped in kelp against the breezing cold, silent with a voice so loud, and nothing in reply is told. Is she below the saline shore, in company with the sweet Lenore, and the much-loved Annabel Lee, in some kingdom by the sea? Again, below is being used, in a sense, with water. They're kind of going together here, below and water. Moving on to some quotes. July 5th, 2012, Forrest Fenn on his Pueblo in San Lazaro. This is from the YouTube channel, The Thrill of the Chase. And he says, so just thinking of the stories that remain out there, 6 inches below where you're walking. Just think of the stories that remain out there, 6 inches below where you're walking. And again, he's talking about the Pueblo at San Lazaro. And he's thinking about all of the things that they've uncovered and all of the stories that they represent. And he's talking about 6 inches below where you're walking. There are stories, artifacts, lives of the past, forgotten because they were buried. November 2nd, 2013, Forrest Fenn at Moby Dickens Bookshop. And you can find this on our YouTube channel. Forrest said, I've buried 8 of those things way out in the desert and in the mountains. Nobody knows where. He's talking about the bells he buried. Moving on. That's why I've told people that I buried the treasure, that I hid the treasure chest when I was either 79 or 80 years old. Did he bury the treasure chest? Or was he just misspeaking here? Was that a mistake, or was that something that came out because it was truthful? Did he bury the treasure? Did he hide it partway in the ground and then partway covered up so that it's a little bit of both being hidden and buried? December 2013, Forrest gets crazy mail. And this is on Dale Neitzel's blog. I have seen them in Yellowstone blooming below 7,000 feet. And he's talking about a certain plant that blooms below 7,000 feet. So not only does he use below with water, but also with elevation. So water and elevation seem to have the most cases where the word below is being used. January 1st, 2014, Hemispheres Magazine, article by Margie Goldsmith. He said, I never said I buried the chest. I said only that I hid it. That is not to say it is not buried. So maybe we need to define the terms. Does hidden mean in plain sight? What is the difference between buried, entombed, and sepulchered? So, well, let's look them up and find out. Entomb. Place a dead body in a tomb. Inter. Place in a tomb. Lay to rest. Bury. Consign to the grave. Place 6 feet under. Bury or trap in or under something. Bury or trap in or under something. Entomb. Sepulcher. A small room or monument cut in rock or built of stone in which a dead person is laid or buried. So we have some sort of a cutout in rock that could be a sepulcher, where the treasure could be placed to be hidden and something placed in front of it, maybe some dirt packed around, just to hide it or camouflage it so it doesn't shine. One of those. April 27, 2015. This is the KOAT article. KOAT it's a video. And it says, and Forrest has said this other times, but I just chose this one particular quote of the many. Quote, the Rosetta Stone was buried for 2,000 years before somebody found it, and I said in my book, don't you know that guy is proud? The guy that carved that Rosetta Stone. That's the way I feel about it. 10,000 years from now, if somebody finds that treasure chest, I'm going to be a hero to that guy. Why would Forrest Fenn be a hero to the guy who found the treasure chest in 10,000 years? Because when he opens it, he'll see many things representing many times throughout history. Because there are ancient pieces in there, there's present day pieces in there, and there's Forrest Fenn's autobiography, which is present day as well. So it would be of great interest to somebody in a very distant future to see something that was from the very distant past. But again, this buried means to put it in the ground and forget about it, doesn't it? September 2015, Forrest Gets Mail, Dale Neitzel's blog. Question, have you narrowed the search area for the treasure? Answer, yes, I said the treasure is hidden in the Rocky Mountains, at least 8 miles north of Santa Fe, excluding Utah, Idaho, and Canada. I have said it is above 5,000 feet and below 10,200. So there we have it again with the elevations, using the word below. Next we have October 6th, 2015, Mysterious Writings. Quote, I have no desire to be buried in a box. It's too dark and cold for me and too lasting. I would rather go into the silent mountains on a warm, sunny day, sit under a tree where the air is fresh and the smell of nature is all around, and let my body slowly decay into the soil. What can be better than that? So he doesn't want to be buried in a box, but he did tell us that a piece of him is inside that treasure chest. So maybe it's not buried because he didn't want to be buried. That's too dark and cold, too lasting. He wants it not to be forgotten. He wants it to be found. May 25th, 2016. And this is on a podcast called The Last Word. And he says, "Now I never said I buried it. I hid it." Okay. July 17th, 2016, the Rudy Maxa Travel Show podcast. This is Dale Neitzel had put this up, and it's still available at that link. And Forrest said, quote, "Well, it's buried more than 8.5 miles north of Santa Fe in the Rocky Mountains, but below the Canadian border." So Forrest right there says it's buried more than 8.5 miles north. And you can listen to this yourself. He does say this. It's buried more than 8.5 miles north of Santa Fe in the Rocky Mountains, but below the Canadian border. Now, he was focused on the part about 8.5 miles north of Santa Fe in the Rocky Mountains and below the Canadian border, and just kind of blurted out the part about it's buried. And you may say, well, that was just a one-time thing. Further down in the same interview, Rudy says, "And how long ago did you bury this?" And Forrest Fenn answers, "About 6 years ago. I never told anybody exactly when." Okay, he did not correct Rudy. He did not say, "I didn't say I didn't bury it. I said I hid it." Because he did say he buried it. And Rudy said, "How long ago did you bury this?" "About 6 years ago." Was his answer. November 2016, Dale Neitzel's blog, Scrapbook 163. Question: Even your wife didn't know when you buried the treasure, correct? Answer: I have never said I buried the treasure, so please don't say that. I hid the treasure, but that does not mean it is not buried. I just didn't want to give that as a clue. And yet he did actually say it right there. Well, it's buried. Maybe he didn't mean to say that, but he did do it. He did say it. It's out there. February 2017, Forrest gets mail from a middle school class, and this is Dale Neitzel's blog. Question: When did you find this spot to bury the treasure, like year? Answer: I have not said that I buried it, and I don't want to reveal when I discovered the spot. It is too much of a clue. What would be too much of a clue? If he found it when he was a kid, if he found it after he moved to Santa Fe, which one would be more of a clue for you? May 2017, Forrest Fenn answers, is the treasure chest buried or not at the screening of The Lure? And again, this is on the Gypsy Kiss YouTube channel. You can find it there. Forrest said, I never said that I buried the treasure chest. That doesn't mean that it isn't buried. I think you're getting technical. I don't want to have to define the terms. Of course, earlier with Margie Goldsmith, he sort of defined the terms. Diana Taylor said, I wasn't speaking about the chest. Forrest continues on. If you look the word burial up in the dictionary, it talks about sepulchering, about entombing, and there's all kinds of definitions. Quite frankly, it's very confusing. So I don't want to answer the question whether the treasure chest is buried or not. Let me give you an example. If I laid the treasure chest on top of the ground and some weeds blew in there and covered it up, now is it buried or is it sepulchered or is it entombed? So it's best not to go there, I think. The clues will lead you to the treasure, and whether it's buried or not, you can find it if you find the blaze as a result of starting with the first clue. Let's go back just a bit here. So If I laid the treasure chest on top of the ground and some weeds blew in there, in where? In there. That's also from the poem, isn't it? As I have gone alone in there. Some weeds blew in there and covered it up. Now, is it buried or is it sepulchered or is it entombed? It's best not to go there, I think. Interesting. So, if he uses the word buried very generally in the same way that he uses the word walk or map, then buried could just be tucked away, hidden, and forgotten about, whether there's dirt covering the entire thing or not. So then it becomes a general word, and he doesn't want to be specific about in what way it's hidden. July 31st, 2017, People Magazine. I never said it was buried. I've avoided that word. I hid it. I don't mean to imply that it isn't buried. I just didn't want to give that as a clue. Now you may be saying, okay, put in below, how did we get into the whole, is it buried or is it not? Kerfuffle. Put in below. When you put something in below the surface of the ground, the surface of an overhang, put something in below. But we are to be putting in below the home of Brown. So what is the home of Brown? Is it an overhang? Is it something that we can go below? As we're going canyon down, are we going below home of Brown because we're now underneath it? What is it? That's a protrusion of some sort? Is it a home of Brown? And Brown is capitalized. And you know, Forrest is pretty good about not capitalizing things unless they're proper nouns. If you look at all of his writings, all of the things he's ever written, you'll find that he doesn't capitalize things willy-nilly. He only capitalizes those things that are supposed to be capitalized according to grammar, English grammar. So he's good about that. And I would imagine that his father had drilled him on that. So he's pretty good about that. So put in below, to me, is a possible nautical term, but possibly not. When he uses the word below, it's usually with water or with elevation. So maybe the home of Brown is at a certain elevation and we're putting in below that elevation. Or the home of Brown is got something to do with water and we're putting in below it. The waterfall fell to the rocks below. Maybe the home of Brown is some kind of a waterfall or some kind of a rock fall. All right, well, that's all I have today for Put In Below. And I do hope that this sparked some new ideas for you in your search theory. I do also hope that if you are not currently in the member vault as one of our beautiful, wonderful VIPs, that you will consider joining us there. Go to gypsieskiss.com and you can join us there. We have a great time every Tuesday and Thursday evening. We spend about 2 hours together discussing the poem and the book and taking a look at some of the videos of interviews of Forrest Fenn and discussing those as well. I hope that you'll consider joining us someday soon. And again, that's at gypsieskiss.com. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.